So next we're going to move into luxury suite configurations. So general overview again, luxury suites in Cisco Vision are containers for media players so that they can be associated with control endpoints and channel guides. Any device that you expect to have pin-based control, whether it's through a third-party application that you develop yourself, whether it's CV+, Crestron, in order for a device to have pin control, it has to be associated with a luxury suite. Separately, if you want a device to receive a channel guide that is anything apart from the default channel guide, that device has to be in a luxury suite. And so what you can see here is the general configuration for a luxury suite. The general tab, you include a name and or a description, whether or not it's active, which means you can turn off this configuration, functionally disabling control if you wanted to. And then TV Guide Auto Launch. In other words, you can create like a hospitality-like experience where a channel guide will automatically come up when a DMP first boots. I don't see this enabled very often, but you can allow that to occur. By default, it's whatever's set up in the registry. We'll talk about where that registry configuration lives, or you can force to disable or enable the auto launch at the individual luxury suite. Most of the time, all you're doing is entering a name and confirming that the suite is active. For location assignment, this is the same as you would see with like a DMP association. You have a list of every location configured in the venue. And this is, by the way, explicitly location. Whether or not there's a DMP associated, you can still assign a location to the luxury suite. A really good example would be the performance venue, because things are still coming up and online. So you'll note that this particular luxury suite has 16 locations, one of which doesn't have a DMP assigned. This can actually be really useful because it means that if you're preparing for a new control region and you're expanding, your DMP deployment, you can create the luxury suite, add the locations in, and then when you get to the point where the DMPs are online, when you link them, they'll already automatically be in the appropriate suite. Assigning a DMP to a suite is very simple. Once you have the device, the suite open, and you're in location assignment, you can click on the DMP you want to add, click Assign Location, and it will drop into the list. This list can be reordered by dragging and dropping. And the order that the devices are presented here translates to the logical ID that you see if you're running an API call. So we'll talk to this later. So the logical ID position 1 is the first CV that's returned on an informational call against that luxury suite pin. Deleting one or modifying it is done the same way. So you'll see that the location name is the location name defined for the actual location. The display label, which by the way is the thing that will pop up on a banner when you send channel commands out, and what shows up when you actually run a query from the API side, that's the display label field, which can be edited to anything. Removing a DMP is the same. You just click on the device you wish to remove and remove it. Changes do have to be saved, so remember to save here when you're done. User TV control.
I have one quick question.
Sure.
When you change the display name like you just did to anything, are you only changing the name in this instance, or is that name now changed for any case of that application?
No, it's only in the luxury suite. So you'll note that so here's display label and location for this demo location. If I hit edit, you'll note that the location name doesn't change. Only the display label changes. So I'm changing the configuration in the luxury suite, not at the location itself. By default, the display label will be the display spec and then the number of times that display spec has occurred. So if I grab like these 3 and 4 and move them over, you'll notice QMR 49-4, etc. Right? Typically, you're going to want to rename these devices. Removing devices is one at a time, although you can add multiples at the time. Next, under user TV control, this is where you can generate a visitor or fixed pin. There's no real functional difference between what the visitor pin and the fixed pin do. They're both used in order to access control dashboards or send API calls. The concept is supposed to be that a fixed pin never changes and is used either administratively or for somebody who is a suite owner. The visitor pin concept is if you have like a fan-facing control application, or let's say you had somebody in a visiting locker room in the HQ facility, right? And you wanted to give them an iPad with a control for their TVs, but you didn't want them to walk out of there and come back into the room and be able to control later. The visitor pin you would expect to change on a regular basis. The fixed pin you would expect to try not to have change. But again, fundamentally, they're just two pins that both control the same space, and you can use them however you want to. You can also see the master pin for your entire facility. A big note about the master pin, this is not specific to the sub-venues. This is your entire facility. There's only one master pin per Cisco Vision deployment. So this pin will return every device that is controllable by pin if you use it. It's typically better to rely on using the local fixed pins and then just send out the queries that are appropriate to the specific areas of the building that you're trying to control. But from an administrative perspective, and you've probably done this from a CV dashboard, you can put the master pin in and just get everything back. You can also export your pins here into a CSV file. You can either export the visitor pin or the fixed pin, or both. Phone and remote, I'm just going to quickly touch on because we talked a little bit about the third-party control devices. If you had a communication manager integration or you're using legacy third-party control devices, this is where they would show up in the Available Devices tab. You'd select the appropriate device and then hit the Assign button and save. Again, probably not pertinent to any new deployment, but this is really like specific to folks who've been using old like 4.0 and 5.0 systems that migrate to any version of 6.0. This is the mechanism you use for that. Locale, if you happen to have language localization packs installed, this is where you would select them. It's selected on a per suite basis. So if you had a suite with a language pack associated with Spanish or Chinese or whatever the local language was, you could select here and apply. Otherwise, the default uses the system's default language.